kuna kitu kidogo kutoka jimboni uweze kupokea kwanza. Sana. Father Steve. Father Wanyoike tumekuwa tukitembea naye sana. Father amekuwa wa karibu kwetu, na Father tunasema ni asante siku ya leo kwa ajili ya mtumishi wetu ambaye Mungu ametupatia siku ya leo. Tunaomba Mungu mwenyewe atatenda maajabu. Father usiwe na wasiwasi. Father Steve tumemfahamu miaka mingi sana. Tumekuwa naye. Utakuwa kama yeye lakini utakopi kuwa kama yeye. Sala ni muhimu na sadiki Mungu atakuwezeshea. Kwa niaba ya kamati Father pokea kila ambacho tunatembea na paroko kidogo.
Asanteni sana kamati ya wito. Sasa nitawalika mama walei. Mama walei guni naona mko karibu.
Hamjamboni tena. Sasa sisi tumeletea Daniel zawadi kutoka kwa madara zake ambao ni masista, ndugu wake ambao ni mafada kutoka parokia yetu. Tumeshukuru.
Asante sana, wapigeni makofi. Nasikia hao ni akina mama walezi, mafathers, masisters, mabrothers. Ndio wanajua mafadha huko kwao Banga wanaendelea namna gani. Wenye picha nafikiri muachukue picha. Sasa tukitoka hapa tunaenda kwa kamati ya Harambee ya Diocese. Ndio waweza kumkabidhi zawadi yao baba wetu Father Daniel. Kamati ya Harambee ya Diocese wako na zawadi yao, waweza kumkabidhi kamati ya Harambee ya Diocese. Wherever you are, the committee under Brother Eric, tunangojea zawadi yako. Na wageni wale wengine wote ambao wamekuja na zawadi zao leo isipokuwa watu wa Mbungoni, na wakaribisha mlete zawadi zao zaidi wakati wetu. Please. Kama kuna mtu amebaki na zawadi alikuwa anataka kumsawadia Father, uwanja sasa uko wazi kwa mtu yeyote binafsi wa kuleta zawadi yake. Ule alikuwa amekuja na zawadi yake asirudi naye. Brother Eric, wherever you are, we are waiting for you. Nafikiri sasa tunataka kutamatisha sherehe yetu. Na ngojea wale wageni ambao wamebaki wanataka kuleta zawadi. Kama hakuna, sasa ndio wakati mtaarika uwanja sasa tena watufungie jukwaa. Tukitoka hapa wageni wetu tunawachukua tunawapeleka baharini. Tutaandamana moja kwa moja twende tuingie kwa ile basi tulikuja naye. Ndio tuweze tukawatembeze. Tuko pamoja? Kwa hiyo tukitoka hapo Ile means ya transport tulikuja naye, kama ukuja na basi, tuko na magari hapa, tutamake sure tumewapeleka wote. Sawa sawa?
Watu wa Ohangla, please hold on my DJ. Watu wa Ohangla, ampo.
Watu wa Ohangla wameenda wapi? Wameenda baharini? Wewe. Ohangla team. Where are you? Ohangla team, where are you? Ohangla team. Na naomba please, sasa tusiingie hapa uwanjani ili tuokoe muda. Kama kuna mtu amebaki na zawadi yake bado aendelee kuleta wakati Ohangla inaendelea.
Hatujafungia mtu katika zawadi.
Ohangla tunataka mchukue muda mfupi sana ndio tuweze kwenda baharini kabla maji hajaenda. Mahali popote mlipo sasa naomba muangalie mbele muone. Ndio hao sasa.
Yangu kwanza ni kuwashukuru wote wageni wetu wa kutoka Siaya na dancers wote, Wakristo wa kutoka Bungoni kwa kazi nzuri, komiti tofauti na wageni wote, tunawashukuru sana. Lakini bado shukurani ni kesho, kwa sababu bado tunaendelea na sherehe zetu. Kamati andalizi ya wageni ya transport ya entertainment itawapeleka wageni wetu kule kwa beach, kwa sababu kesho hawatakuwa na nafasi, na tunaelezwa sapa itakuwa hapa saa 12:30, kuanzia saa 12:30. Baada ya chakula. Mwenyezi, tunakushukuru kwa wema wako, kwa baraka zako nyingi. Tunakushukuru kwa uwepo wako katika maisha yetu. Tunakushukuru kwa zawadi ya padre mpya ambayo umetupatia kama zawadi imetoka kwako. Tunakushukuru kwa zawadi ya wazazi wake ambao ndio chanzo cha zawadi hii katika parokia yetu na katika shirika letu. Mungu Baba, uweze kuwabariki na kuwatendea mema, kuwapatia afya njema, kuwaondolee shida zote, na ile kazi ambayo labda padre angefanya nyumbani lakini ukamuita, uweze kusimama katika makao yao, na uweze kuwa na wazazi na pia wapatie watoto wengi ambao watawatazama. Tunamwombea Baba wetu, Mungu umpe nguvu, umpe moyo wa kujitolea, umpe afya nzuri, ili tuweze kushirikiana katika kuwalete watu wa Mungu kwako Mungu. Tunaombea wa Marianisti, kushukuru kwa zawadi yao, wageni wote ambao wametutembelea kutoka Siaya, wageni wote wametoka Zambia, wote wametoka Nairobi, Marianisti walei, mabruda wa Marianisti na marafiki wote ambao wameweza kuwa pamoja nasi siku ya leo. Tunaomba Mungu waweze kuwajalia baraka zako. Na tunapoendelea na kusherehekea, tunakumbuka Wakristo wote wa Bungoni, na hasa wale wanajitolea kwa hali na mali, uweze kuwatendea mema. Na tunaomba uwepo wako katika shughuli zetu ambazo zimebaki. Tunaomba hayo yote kwa njia ya Kristo Bwana wetu. Bwana awe nani. Mapadre wote wabariki Mungu Mwenyezi, Baba na Mwana na Roho Mtakatifu. Asanteni sana. Misa kesho ni saa 3 asubuhi.
I'm Father Odero Osino, a Marianist priest ordained today, which it's all from God. I thank the Lord for the gift of this day, for bringing so many people into my life. There are people who have been very instrumental to my life, beginning with my late grandmother, who was the matriarch of faith in our family, and that faith was passed on to my father and my mother, who practiced it and handed it over to me. And they have become models for me of what it means to believe in God, because when I look at them, they believe, they depend upon divine providence. I was brought up in a very, very humble family. We had our own struggles and many challenges going through school into adulthood, but God was always at the center of my family. It didn't matter what the challenge was. I always saw my mother and father as very, very faithful people. And that faith somehow was planted in me as a young man, and I was always close to the church. I was always close to the church. You know, if you want to encounter God, you have to be close to the church. There's no way a young man would respond to God's calling if he's far away from the church, because that faith is implanted in us, but then the church has been given the graces to nurture that faith, to bring it forth, to ensure that that faith blossoms. And for me, this was a great gift from my parents because they always encouraged me, they challenged me even as a young man when sometimes I thought church was boring, my friends were not going to church. There was always something about them that kept me going for many years. And in high school, I had a great experience joining the Young Catholic movement, and we had rallies and workshops. This is where I really grew as a person in my life, my relationship with God. I knew more and more about Scripture, about Christ, and about people who, examples of people who are faithful all their lives. The old women in our parish who, every morning would beat the weather. It didn't matter whether it rained or there was sun, they all went to church. And every time I entered that church, in Baga, for example, in my later years, I always saw these women who are so faithful. And it struck me that there are so many saints in the church. The church actually is a church of saints, because sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we focus more on the sin. But the church is a church of saints. Yes, a saint is a sinner who struggles every day, with a sin. A saint is not a perfect human being, no. A saint is a sinner who actually, struggles through life, but they know one thing, that God is everything. If they have God, they know they have everything. And so I joined the Marinists after that, and that was a great experience. When I met the Marinists and I was invited to the Marinist community, I felt I was home away from home. I knew this was my place. There are many options that I had, whether to go be a Salesian or a Consolata, but as soon as I joined the Marinist community, I knew I was home. And from there, I never looked back. There were many challenges. The Marinist community is not a perfect. We always say that we are men marked by sin. We always need God's mercy, and we need to show that mercy to others. That is the message actually of Pope Francis, to go out to the peripheries, to uplift the lowly, those who are despised. And for me, this is a real message for my ministry as a priest, as a Marinist priest. First of all, I'm a brother, and then within that vocation of brotherhood, I am called to serve as a minister in the church, in the priesthood of Christ himself. And for me, it is a priesthood of service, washing the feet. That's what Jesus did. Jesus, his whole life, he preached, and he washed the feet of his death, giving us that example, that of the humility. Do to this, do to this. I've shown you, how to live with one another. Now go forth and do the same to your brothers. And today, for me, it's that same great joy to be here, to see so many faithful people who have been very generous. Since I arrived here in Mombasa from Rome, after studying there, and that opened my horizon. My formation in Rome, Italy, actually opened my horizons, because I lived with so many people who are going to be priests like me from different parts of the world. And they challenged me positively to think for myself, to be independent, but to rely on God, because it is God who has called me. It is God who called me as a young man. It is God who calls me today as a priest, as a Marinist, to serve in his church with that humility. And I know for myself, I'm a testimony, I know that, whether I'm gifted or not, is the one who has called me. I can never rely on my own efforts, my skills, my intelligence. That's nothing, because at the end of the day, it is God's grace that I am here today as a priest, as a Marinist, as a brother among brothers in the Society of Mary. And we have a great mission for us in the church. We believe that this gift of being disciples of equal brothers and priests living together, sharing that common vocation, that is a common gift of God, sanctity. That is our aspiration. Whether we are brothers or priests, our aspiration is holiness. It doesn't matter if I'm a priest and I'm not growing in holiness, if I'm not living a life of sanctity, then priesthood just becomes a name for me. But deep inside, I have to go every day on my knees, before the Lord, to examine my own conscience, to ask for His mercy always. Because if I rely on His mercy, then I can also show that mercy to the people that I'll be working with. So I'm very happy to be here in Bungoni, as was announced that this will be my place for now. And who knows what God has in store for me. I'm ready to work for the people here, to show them that love that they have shown me, and to be a minister who encourages, who shows that forgiveness, who shows that mercy to everybody. But in order to do this, I need God's grace. My own self, I cannot be that forgiving or that merciful if it is not a gift from God.
To your parents and the people who've journeyed with you throughout this process up to where you've achieved, and a special message to them.
To my parents, I thank you, Mom, and I thank you, Dad, for bringing me forth into this world, for the joyful life that I've lived. We didn't have a lot in the family, and we have lived simple, but we have always been happy. Doesn't mean that we were not facing challenges as a family. We have faced so many challenges, and yet that faith that is the pillar of our family, that faith that is the rock that guides us and moves us, that's what has kept us going. I would like also to thank my superiors, the Maranists, who have been very supportive. When I first joined the Maranists, the priesthood wasn't in my mind, to be honest. What appealed to me most was, the faith that the Maranists imparted through education. I had my elder sister who was a teacher, and I was kind of always moved towards education because of her. I wanted to give my life, to be an educator, to minister as an educator. And so when I found the Maranists, I found my place. I wanted to be a good educator, faith through education. That was, multiplication of disciples through schools, through institutions, through the communities of faith that the Maranists were forming. This was my own aspiration and goal. But then later, this seed sort of was planted in me, and more my superiors asked me if I would consider becoming a Maronist priest after my final vows. And at the back of my mind, I always knew that once a Maronist, always a Maronist, and I was ready to do whatever God was going to call me to do as a Maronist. And so I would not say that it was very difficult for me to discern being a priest, because I was always a Maronist at heart, and I knew that entails sometimes a call to serve as a priest in the Society of Mary.
Wow. Any special message to those who are aspiring to become priests, and as well to the young people?
To the young people, I think this is important, first of all, to the parents, because if it is not faith, if there's no culture of faith in a family, there's no way a young girl can just wake up, or a young man, and say, I want to be religious. In Europe, in the medieval ages, and even later in the 18th century, there were many vocations. You would find one family had, a family of 9 children, 6 of them become religious. Maybe 3 priests, 3 sisters. Why? Because there was a culture. The faith was part of the culture. But this culture has died, unfortunately, or it's waving. Most families today, mother doesn't go to church, or the father sleeps on Sunday, doesn't encourage the kids to pray. Myself, I learned, Our Father, Hail Mary, glory be to the Father, from my own